Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, commentary contributing editor and poobah of many hats at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, our good friend Jonathan Schanzer. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, John.
All right, so we got to get to Rafah and the errant thing that happened that first was an Israeli mistake and may not have been an Israeli mistake, and various other things. But I guess we sort of have to start with the closing arguments in the Trump trial, which of course none of us watched, as we don't have TV in the courtrooms here in New York City. And we were all, if you're paying attention, you were following on Twitter through various feeds of people who were sort of trying to summarize what was going on. And of course, there were hijinks outside the courtroom with Robert De Niro yelling at protesters, each of them seeming equally psychotic. De Niro like actually wanting to look like he wanted to go curb stomp a couple of them like he faked it in The Irishman, and then them calling him a has-been and him calling and screaming obscenities at them, and then the Trump family coming out and basically saying that they thought Trump would be acquitted or the jury would hang because he was white, which was really a very helpful thing for one of the Trump sons to say. So it was a really wonderful day for American democracy, the future of our country, our jurisprudence, our jurisprudential system, and all that. But basically, this poor jury was there from like 9 a.m. Till 8 p.m. The defense went on for a couple of hours, and the prosecution went on for, I think, roughly 127 hours, or approximately the time it takes to cut through your arm if you're trapped under a boulder in a park in Utah to get the hell away from the boulder, seemingly just wanting to browbeat the jury into submission with the intensity of its desire to secure a Trump conviction. So the defense basically said there was no crime. If there was a crime, he didn't do it. Michael Cohen was his lawyer, so he can't have been paying him improperly. And the notion that he was somehow doing anything that any other person wouldn't have done to try to suppress bad information if they had the means to do it, either for any reason, either to become president or to run a business deal or something like that, is a ludicrous presumption. It's perfectly legal to try to keep bad news about yourself out of the public sphere. And then the prosecution said, no, everything he did was in the furtherance of this effort to he was paying off Stormy Daniels. B, which apparently, though it's not a crime, they're basically desperately trying to make the jury think is a crime. B, he was paying off Michael Cohen for paying Stormy Daniels. Michael Cohen wasn't his lawyer, therefore it was an illicit payment. It was some kind of fake campaign contribution. The prosecution's argument, which may end up prevailing here, is, to use one of my famous pop culture analogies I've used on this show before, John Belushi in the tunnel facing Carrie Fisher with the machine gun in the Blues Brothers, where she says, "Why did you walk out on me on the wedding?" And he says, the dog ate my homework. I had a flat tire. There was a tree in the roadway. My grandmother had a heart attack. I slipped and fell and broke my arm. And then as he's talking, she just like softens and softens and softens because he's using every excuse in the book, and it's fine. They were just spewing whatever they had to spew over 8 hours, and we'll see what happens. Our friend Andy McCarthy at National Review, of course, was a former federal prosecutor, U.S. attorney. Very, very prosecuted the blind shake and all that. Basically said this case is Calvin Ball, that the judge wants to secure a conviction, and is finding for the defense in every possible way and doing whatever he can not to find anything to sustain any objection from the defense. And we'll see what he says this morning, and then they're going to go into jury deliberations. Uh, thoughts? Don't everybody jump in at once on the most important legal case of our time.
My thoughts are mostly on the decision by the Biden campaign to do an official campaign event without the candidate or anybody who's really sort of part of the campaign in a meaningful way, but to have a celebrity do it. I mean, the truth is that it's really just the existence of having an event outside the courthouse at all struck me as incredibly bizarre. And it was appropriate that Robert De Niro's performance in yesterday's film on the streets of New York was also bizarre. But he has been, he's been filming in New York, and 2 weeks ago he got into an argument over anti-Israel protesters, where he was telling them to shut up and go home and basically learn to code or something. So he's kind of in a mode. De Niro is kind of in a mode where he's kind of stalking the streets of Manhattan, yelling at people. And that in itself is something that's bizarre. But I absolutely do not get what the calculus was within the Biden campaign, that it would be better.
Well, they thought he was a fine young man. to Joe Biden, Robert De Niro is a rising young star who is just emerging, having won a Best Supporting Actor Oscar. And, he needs his youth and his vitality and to appeal to young people who with whom he seems to have a deficit. So he went right to the source. Robert De Niro talks to the youth, represents that view. I mean, look, it's Biden, it's the Democratic Party. Like, they could have had anybody. They could have. I know De Niro lives 3 blocks from the courthouse, so it's like an easy walk for him. And then he's near a bathroom because he is 80 years old and presumably needs a bathroom every 90 minutes, like most 80-year-old people do. So it's a convenient location for him. But yeah, I mean, if you were going to say, okay, we're going to have an event outside the courthouse to get a lot of get news that can go on Entertainment Tonight and go on every local channel, be the thing on the Today Show pop thing and all of that. Why couldn't they get Matt Damon? Why couldn't they get Zendaya? I don't know. I mean, they could. Well, again, they could
other
get
people in that movie that he was shooting. I think he was in New York with other there were other actors that in the video of him yelling at pro-Palestinian protesters, there are other actors sort of standing aside. So yeah, I mean, there were like other known people who are also apparently stalking the streets of New York with some extra time on their hands. But I mean, I mentioned this yesterday, but I remember that De Niro was at Obama's rally in 2008. I remember seeing him at a 2008 rally in New Jersey at the Meadowlands with he and Ted Kennedy and Obama. And that was kind of a night, or one of the nights, where you realized Obama was really going to win, because I think it was just pre-Super Tuesday, so he was still behind maybe in the delegates, but it was very clear that he was, and he gave this like 80-minute Castro type speech. And I thought about that, but then I realized that was 16 years ago. Huh. Like, it's not like De Niro was with the campaign last year. This is a very long time ago.
I think I think that is also the most interesting part of what happened, because we can't know what the jury is going to come out with. So, but what it tells me about the Biden campaign is that they recognize that Trump's sort of street appearances, kind of pop-up creative campaigning that he's done while he's had to be confined to New York has gotten attention. And they want to get into some version of that game. Why De Niro? It could be because I don't know that there's a lot of takers to do what he did yesterday. It's not a particularly dignified thing event to do for your candidate, to stand outside and scream outside the trial of someone else. It's not it's not elevated. I don't know that anyone would come and do that.
Well, okay, so just to back up a little bit, the De Niro Street Theater becomes a story, but it wasn't planned. I mean, he didn't know that there were going to be like J6 protesters who were going to be yelling at him about how Michael Fanone, the Capitol policeman who resigned, that someone was going to say that guy standing behind you is a traitor because he lied and whatever. And Michael, he's a terrible person because he was a Capitol policeman. He resigned after January 6th and said Donald Trump should be, driven from a public life because, of the horrors of what happened at the Capitol. So that he didn't know. He didn't know how to react. He's not the world's most articulate person. He's an actor. So some actors are quick on their feet. Most aren't. De Niro is famously not quick on his feet. That's not his MO. And he wasn't supposed to stand there and shout F you at somebody, is my guess. So, and I think it steps on something important, by the way, which is there argument that Trump must lose in 2024 because he is a unique threat to democracy and the future of America immediately, an immediate threat, and that he will cancel elections, he'll try to run for a third term, whatever it is? Or is it that he's a clown? Because that's what De Niro said about it. De Niro said he's a clown. A clown is not the new Mussolini. If you want to make the argument that Trump is Mussolini 100 years later and his re-embodiment, that's not the way you do it. You don't then get into a tussle with some Yahoo J6 psychotic and then look as psychotic as the J6 guy. You are more elevated. You're like, this is a terrifying thing that's going on in this courtroom. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it worked, got a lot of attention. But I do think that they're pursuing two different, wildly divergent. Here's what De Niro says about Trump and has said since 2016. He's a clown. I would like to punch him in the face. I don't care what he did. I want him convicted of a crime because he's bad and I hate him and F you. Now, okay, I don't think that's the winning argument for Biden to succeed in the election. Either if he wants to run with the threat to democracy, that's one thing. If he wants to say that Trump is a chaos agent who will make America's life worse, because if you remember, boy, things were crazy back in 2018. Having Robert De Niro screaming at a guy on a street corner is not the way to make the argument that America is going to be a lot saner if Biden is reelected. That's just more going down the road toward absolute, national psychopathy.
By the way, I have to correct myself. I have to apologize. Apparently this was what everybody thought was happening. So Netflix came out and said De Niro was not yelling at pro-Palestinian protesters. He was rehearsing a scene for the upcoming Netflix psychological thriller, 0 Day. And when he yelled at them, "This is not a movie. This is real life," it was, in fact, a movie and not real life. And that was part of the script. So I apologize for suggesting that De Niro had another scrape that was apparently part of a script. Yesterday's was obviously not part of a Netflix series called 0 Day.
So I do want to point out before we move on from this that a very exciting film project that Robert De Niro has completed for Joe Biden, because of its incredible youth and vitality, that will be presented to the American people this year, a film called Alto Nights, in which he appears to be playing Vito Genovese, who, of course, was the model for the Don and the Godfather, whom he played famously as a young man, literally 50 years ago this year. Alto Nights is a film, will be coming out with a director named Barry Levinson, who is 81 years old. It was written by Nick Pileggi, a very lovely guy, by the way, who is 91 years old. And one of its producers is Irwin Winkler, who, if he is still alive, and I think he may have died last year, is like 95 years old. And then there's De Niro, of course, who is 80 or about to turn 81. And I think for Biden, this is like beach blanket bingo. Like this is a movie, it's like Porky's. It's like it's a film about youth and energy and vitality that that I think he's probably very much and happy to promote in whatever way he can, because obviously Hollywood has had a tough year this year, and a movie starring 200-year-old men directed by 300-year-old men is really gonna turn things around. Now,
by the way,
yes.
in 2000, I was just looking at what movie he was doing in 2008 just to see if it was really felt that much younger. But actually, the 2008 De Niro movie was What Just Happened, directed by Barry Levinson. So there you go. It's really time is a flat
they're
circle.
Back. Yeah, they're getting back
the
together.
Plot is, it says 2 weeks in the life of a fading Hollywood star.
Yes, and he also in 1998, which was 25 years ago, with Barry Levinson, did Wag the Dog. So, he is, it's just, but again, for Biden time, these are all, they could all have been released yesterday. And, if they have the titles on and Hunter is sitting next to him, reminding him of where the plot is going every 5 minutes, he might make it all the way through. To move from the ridiculous to the not so sublime, though, none of us is a lawyer. I know. Schanzer, are you a lawyer? Okay,
Thank
Schanzer's
God, no.
not a lawyer. None of us is a lawyer. So we're not in courtrooms. We have no idea. People I trust say that it looked to them like the prosecution got the better of the day, simply because Mershon let them say anything without stopping them. And I guess he will deliver jury instructions saying that'll make it very clear what it is that he is going to tell them they need to rule on, which apparently will be whatever the prosecution wants them to rule on. So, I don't know. So, any thoughts about the Trump? We decided we were going to talk about the Trump case. So you have to say something about the Trump. We said before the show started that we needed to talk about. I'm not blaming Jonathan Schanzer, who is an expert, knows everything that there is to know about our second subject. But I do want to point out that I did say we were going to talk about the Trump case, and you said okay. So now we've talked about how old Biden is, and De Niro's silly, and Barry Levinson's directorial career. Abe, give me something.
Well, I continue to think what I've thought this whole time. It's a gut feeling, which is just that he's going to be. I think it's more likely that there will be a conviction than not, because I just don't see how a New York jury can resist the opportunity, in their eyes, a world historic opportunity to convict Donald Trump and, in their mind, shape the course of the upcoming presidential election and American history. That's what I continue to cling to. I don't know.
None of us knows. I think that is a likely possibility. I also think it's a likely possibility, even though they can't both be likely possibilities, because then we get into the Tevye, you're right, and you're also right problem of contradictions. But I think it's also very possible that one or two members of the jury will say this case is preposterous. Why do I think that? Because the case is preposterous. I mean, I've been watching the case. I thought the case was when they brought the indictments, and I think I'm intellectually honest enough, and also not sympathetic to Trump enough, that I would have been readily convinced if the case had gone in a direction that I thought proved the allegation that he had committed a crime and a cover-up and all of that. And I'm not in the courtroom, but I paid extremely close attention, and it just seems to me that it's a ludicrous case, and only one person has to say this is a ludicrous case. I'm not unjustly convicting a man because you're all browbeating me to convict the guy. I'm, it's 12 angry men, and I'm going to sit here like Henry Fonda and say no. I mean, I do think that's plausible, but we'll know either.
I mean, just
soon,
to say,
yes, okay.
I know we already covered the De Niro thing, but I thought one thing he said here, one thing he actually said yesterday bears on what we're discussing. He said something to the effect of, "I don't care if he's acquitted. I don't care if the jury hangs. I don't care if he's found guilty. We know he's guilty anyway. We know he did it." I think that sentiment is so prevalent in New York that's the issue. That, along with the fact that the judge has sort of bent every rule into place, so to give the broadest leeway for a conviction.
Two of the jurors are lawyers, which seems to me to be a double-edged sword, because I don't quite know how old they are, where they're from, and if they went through law school and are social justice warriors, then they'll presumably be social justice warriors who believe in the mutability of all law based on politics. But that could be a wild card, in that lawyers may think that they know something about the law and then say, well, this isn't really adding up based on what I understand or not. There are all these variations on the matter, but we'll know soon enough, I guess, and then what'll happen will happen or not happen. So maybe we should. So we've done our due diligence. We talked about Trump. And we of course talked about the Alto Kings and Netflix, so we just gave them some publicity. And now we can move to actually matters of desperately serious concern. Jonathan Schanzer, we have a major fog of war moment in Rafah, Israel, after a 300. I can't remember how many rockets were fired out of Rafah. Couple hundred, something like that.
Out of Rafah the other day was, I think,
the other day.
8 or 10 rockets.
8 or 10 rockets.
Yeah.
At Tel Aviv and Beersheba and all. So it was only 8 or 10. I don't know why I thought it was more. Okay, because usually when Hamas fires rockets, they just they're like lighting Roman candles.
There was an 8 or 10 that came, I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago, and then there was the salvo into central.
The salvo is what I was talking about.
Yeah.
So they're firing rockets out of Rafah, and so Israel, which is in Rafah, though people don't seem to quite know that. Like there are now tanks apparently in the center of Rafah. They've been doing missions for a week and a half. We don't know what they're doing exactly, but presumably they're mapping the tunnels, or they're trying to figure out where people are. They evacuated these million people out of Rafah, so there were these salvos, and so they decided to hit these. Maybe not in response, because they would have done it anyway, but hit these 2 Hamas commanders. And then this tent city, something happened, something flammable happened, and there were like 20 or 30 tents, and they went up in flames, and we still don't have a body count. First it was 45, so my guess is it's more like 12, but given who was reporting how many deaths there were, but nonetheless. So, and then the weird part was that Israel seemed almost immediately to act as though it had done something wrong. We're investigating. Bibi Netanyahu called it a tragic mishap, interestingly. And then 3 hours later, after Bibi said it was a tragic mishap, they're like, no, we're not even sure we even did this. We're not even sure it was us. In fact, the place that we struck was a mile away from where the tent encampments were. And Hamas may have placed some kind of arms or weapons depot right next to it. And something happened that Hamas did that lit this up almost independently, or they were maybe trying to get stuff out of it, and it blew up, and then it set these tents on fire. Do I have this right? Because as I say, I don't even know how many salvos there were. I'm starting to get, like Robert De Niro. I can't follow the plot anymore.
Yeah, you basically have the chronology right. And I do think that it's interesting that the Israelis first came out and said, no, we didn't do anything wrong. And then they came back and kind of corrected that and said, well, we're investigating. And then you had Bibi come out and say that it's a tragedy. And now you've got him going back on all of that, saying, no, this was Hamas, that this was either a Jeep that was filled with munitions or some other site that was hit. And that, I think we're looking at a scenario whereby Hamas has been doing what it's always been doing, which is operating in civilian areas and endangering the population. And the Israelis, I think, have realized this. But you have to understand that all of this is happening against the backdrop of that ICJ hearing, right, where all eyes are now on Rafah. The International Court of Justice has warned Israel that it could be brought up on war crimes charges for its activities in Rafah. And this explains the social media memes that we're seeing, over the last couple of days, all eyes on Rafah, as if the entire world, right? We're certainly seeing people out of Hollywood and the music industry and a bunch of others really trying to draw attention to this. They're trying, I got to say, it looks like a very obvious attempt to keep Hamas in power. That this idea that everyone is watching and that Israel is, on the verge of committing some kind of, war crime or genocide, these are the words that we're hearing, and it's absolutely, to just say that it is. That it's not true is a complete understatement. The Israelis, as you just mentioned, John, have moved out 1 million people from Rafah. They are operating on a severely limited basis right now. And from what we can tell, they've committed nothing wrong. But that, in fact, they're actually responding to these salvos. They're responding to Hamas aggression. And once again, the Israelis are getting hauled before the court for the crime of defending themselves. And it's outrageous to watch the hypocrisy on display from our the international community, from the international system. It's really frustrating to watch, because really the goal is to restrain Israel from everything that it needs to do in order to defend itself.
Can I just take a moment to be a little hortatory, which I don't like to preach, but I just want to say that it is very important to people who are listening to me. You know this, I think most of you know this, but to say it pretty much every single time somebody says to you, but what about Israel doing this or that or the other thing? And it's very simple. Every single death in Gaza is on Hamas's head. There was peace before October 7th. Hamas attacked Israel. Israel has gone into Gaza to respond to the attacks on it and to reestablish deterrence. Hamas hides among civilians. Israel has to go and get the people who attacked it and the fighters. Every one of those deaths is the responsibility of Hamas. If Israel goes and attacks Hamas commanders after 2 salvos directly from the area in which Hamas is now cornered, in the southeastern corner of Gaza, then the things that happen militarily after those rockets are fired is morally on Hamas's head. And I think we're now at the point at which we need to go back to first principles with people if we're going to be trying to have these conversations and trying to stand up for things that we believe in, to go back to this basic thing. There is not a single death in Gaza to which moral responsibility attaches to Israel. Not a single one. Israel would not be doing what it is doing in Gaza now if it were not for October 7th, and civilians would not be killed in Gaza were it not for Hamas hiding among them, and the hostages wouldn't have been taken, and we wouldn't have operations for the hostages. And it's we get very in the weeds and detailed about who did what, and here's the proof, and look at the trajectory of this attack, and we can see that this compound was here and that was here, and so Israel couldn't possibly have done it. If Israel set a match because someone was smoking and threw the match, an Israeli soldier threw a match into a tent city in Rafah, and the entire tent city went up because he threw the match, every single one of those deaths is the responsibility of Hamas, because that tent city wouldn't be there if it weren't for the attack of October 7th. everybody would have been back in there. Gaza wouldn't have been mostly leveled, or a lot of Gaza wouldn't have been leveled by the Israelis as they go building into building after building after building, and find that every single building is either an arms depot or a tunnel entrance in an area in which 2 million people live. So imagine you're living in New York City, and every single building on the Upper West Side, when you go down into the basement, has an entry to a tunnel, or has RPGs and machine guns in where the bike storage might be. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, because I feel like people really aren't saying it enough. I certainly haven't been saying it enough. And like, it's like the first thing that should be said, like almost like a, Gesundheit or something while you talk.
Look, I totally agree with that, and I mean, it doesn't mean that Israel doesn't make mistakes, and mistakes are happening on the battlefield, and I think we can acknowledge that, and we can acknowledge that there is suffering on all sides and all of that stuff. But you're absolutely right that none of this would be happening were it not for Hamas, and actually more broadly, this wouldn't be happening were it not for Iran, right? Iran is the sponsor of Hamas. They're the sponsor of Hezbollah. They're the sponsors of the Houthis, which just targeted a Greek ship overnight in the Red Sea. Iran is the one that has financed and armed the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria. They're behind the unrest and the violence in the West Bank. And they're, of course, responsible for the 300 rockets and drones that they fired at Israel last month. So, at the end of the day, you're right that this was a war that was triggered by Hamas, and that all the death and destruction that we're seeing in Gaza is on their heads. But let's not leave Iran out of this conversation. They are truly the drivers of all of this, and it is their strategy that is playing out now across the Middle East. And I think we're watching. The Iranians, quite frankly, they're playing chess while the Biden administration plays checkers. And I will actually also just say this: while I don't see a strategy that is being articulated by the Biden administration or acknowledgement of what's happening in Gaza or around the Middle East, where the Biden administration has a strategy to counter all of this, I have to say, I'm not sure that we've seen the Israelis articulate one either right now as this war escalates. And that does bother me right now, that we just don't see anyone on the right side of history, or hopefully on the right side of history, articulating the proper response to bring all of this to an end and to hold to account those that started this.
Just want to say before we went on air, I asked Jonathan to give us some optimism and good news, and I just want to say he has yet to fulfill that, and the podcast will not stop until.
Okay, let me do that now, Seth, and I'm going to give you a couple things that have occurred that I think are noteworthy and positive. The first is that Israel apparently now controls 75%, give or take, of the Philadelphia corridor. This is that border area between the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza that is likely the site where, I guess you could say, Hamas has been replenishing its rockets and allowing its people to cross into Egypt and then train elsewhere. Once the Israelis gain full control of this, they will be able to get underground and figure out how to stop the replenishing of those rockets. This is crucial for Israel to gain control of the Gaza Strip. And so I see this as a significant tactical achievement by the IDF, and I think there's room for optimism there. But that's not even the best news. We actually are seeing, number one, that the Europeans are going on the offensive against Iran, that they want to condemn the Iranians at the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, for their nuclear advancements. And so you have right now kind of some transatlantic action. The bad news, of course, is that the Biden administration is trying to stop them from this censure of the Iranians. We can talk about the insanity of that policy. So maybe a little bit of negative news, but the Europeans are right now, they're animated, and they actually want to do more to condemn the Iranians. They also were seeing movement by a couple of European countries that they want to designate the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. There does appear to be an understanding on the other side of the Atlantic about who's to blame for all of this. And I think that's actually quite positive. How's that?
That's good. But I want to, yeah, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt somebody else bringing in the crushing morosity, because Abe might say it's worse than that. But two things that are also of interest and that maybe you can help illuminate. There is the conundrum of the Biden administration's relationship with Saudi Arabia. We've been talking about this now for weeks, that the Democratic Party turned on Saudi Arabia. Not that it was ever a big, friend of Saudi or whatever, but like after the horrible dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey at a Saudi consulate. Khashoggi, of course, a columnist with the Washington Post. So the Washington Post then became a crusading organization that Saudi Arabia had to be held to account, or that Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince who runs Saudi Arabia, actually had to be held to account personally, directly for this murder, and that it became kind of the policy of the Democratic Party that Saudi Arabia needed to be isolated in some fashion. The Saudi Democrats come into power, Biden wins, and they start pursuing this policy. Well, that policy is now way long over. They've gone in the other direction, but they're saying the craziest stuff from what I can tell behind the scenes. Like, and Jonathan, maybe you can help me suss this out. So they're saying, okay, here's what's great. It's going to be great. We're going to make a three-way deal. We're negotiating with Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel in exchange for Israel stopping the war in Rafah and declaring its support for a Palestinian state. That's all they need to do. All they need to do is declare support for Israel, declare support for the Palestinian state. Then there will be normalization with Saudi Arabia. Now, first of all, had Trump won in 2021, or had the Biden administration come to its senses in December of 2020 and said, this thing we're talking about with the Saudis, we better drop that. Like, this is lunatic policy directing our relations with one of the more important geopolitical and geostrategic countries in the world based on something that happened to one guy in one building 3 years ago. But Israel was doing this itself. Like, Israel didn't need America to be negotiating Saudi normalization, at least not until the final mile. So it's no great shakes that America is dangling normalization of relations. Saudi Arabia basically implicitly permitted 5 or 6 or 7 countries in the Persian Gulf to normalize relations with Israel as a kind of test run for normalization, starting with in 2015, 2016. Okay, so, and they're like, okay, so here's the deal. We'll help you normalize relations if you declare a Palestinian state. And then the Saudis, what are the Saudis supposed to do? Are they supposed to be to the right of the United States and publicly and openly say, we don't care about a Palestinian state? What do we care about a Palestinian state? What the hell are you talking about? We want to build this 75-mile long city. We would very much like Jewish capital and Israeli know-how to help us build Neom, which is literally a city 75 miles long and 2 miles wide. I don't know what the hell it's going to be, but there it is. That's what we want. And we would like to make this as easy as possible. So if we could just kind of iron this out. But if you're going to say we have to support a Palestinian state, what are we going to say? No? So yeah, okay, let's have a Palestinian state along with normalization. If that's what you want, Jake Sullivan, I guess we have to say that. Do you agree with this analysis that I've just laid out for you on the insanity of American policy here, which is to try to lever the Saudis, who are happy to be rid of the Palestinians as their vassal and have been rid of the Palestinians as a vassal really for 20 years. And now they're really rid of it because of American pressure?
Yeah, so I agree. Let me maybe make a couple of points in addition to what you've just said. Number one, Neom is actually pretty cool from what I've seen.
I know. I want to go there.
Yeah.
And so Israel could help build it, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay.
I think Israel can. And I think, by the way, that Neom is going to be really interesting. It's probably going to be the place where the laws are more lax and you're going to see a lot of people traveling from around the region. It also may be a really significant terrorism target over the years. But I mean, it's going to be a really interesting project regardless. And I've seen some of the architectural renderings of what's going to be built there, and it looks just really amazing. Okay, that's number one, but not really the main point. Number two, the Saudis that I've met over the years in going over there, and I've been, I don't know, 6 or 7 times over the last 7 or 8 years, they consistently have conveyed that their policy toward the Palestinians is one of benign neglect. That they really, like, it's not to say that they don't care. I think they'd like to see their Palestinian brethren ultimately fulfill their, designs for statehood. That the national project is something that they, broadly support, but that they're not going out of their way to get involved in this anymore because it's been such a disaster. And that has actually, in part, led to the process of normalization with Israel. And let me just say, normalization is a process. It is not an event, right? They have already normalized. I mean, I have actually seen people that hold dual passports, U.S. and Israeli passports, and they're there in Saudi Arabia and they're trying to make deals and they're engaging with stakeholders and this stuff's happening. And you don't need the United States to say, we bless this and we sprinkle Biden dust on it and therefore it's true. It's already happening. And I think the Israelis are confident in this. And I think, by the way, so are the Saudis. Now, there are some things that the Saudis want, right? They want that defense architecture that we saw in action last month, those air defenses that activated and helped Israel. It didn't actually do all of the hard work, but it definitely provided assistance to the Israelis as they shot down those 300 missiles and drones fired by Iran. That is absolutely something that the Saudis want. And they also want to be able to align themselves with the Israelis when you can see that they are they're efficient on the battlefield and that they're fierce on the battlefield. These are things that are actually inspirational to the Saudis. They want to know that they have the potential to align themselves with a winner in the region. But here's the problem. The U.S. does not look like it's winning in the region. This is their biggest, I think, this is the knock against this entire normalization process that the U.S. is dangling. We look confused. We look like we have no strategy because we have no strategy right now. We're not trying to lock horns with the Iranians. We're not trying to dismantle their ability to attack us or the Israelis in the Middle East. And so we look weak and confused, and that is making the Saudis look around the region to perhaps even align themselves. And I mean, we saw this the other day. The Saudis, the official Saudi government, was to their response to Raisi's death in that helicopter crash was to reach out and express condolences to the government of Iran. What is going on here right now? Right? They are hedging their bets because we do not look like we have our act together. And that is ultimately what is going to unravel whatever Biden thinks he's doing in the region right now. If we start to project strength and we organize our allies in the region, I think the Saudis will get on board and the price will be quite low for normalization. But that's not what's happening right now. And that's really, I think, something that the administration is going to have to grapple with.
You say that Israel's in control of 75% of the hilariously named Philadelphia corridor because, of course, of the deep ties of brotherly love between Hamas and
Jonathan is from the Philadelphia corridor.
Yes, I am.
Yes, you are. You are
from the main line, as it's known.
From the main line, yes. Well, the main line between Gaza and Egypt is one in which there is not much love lost between the ruling terrocracy in Gaza and the dictatorship in Egypt, notwithstanding the fact that there are those tunnels and passageways into Egypt from which Hamas is resupplying itself. Israel's in charge there. You talk about battlefield mistakes. You talk about Israel not articulating a kind of vision for what's going on here. You also are, have deep connections and sources inside Israel. To what extent do you lay some of this at the feet of a kind of profound existential exhaustion that has overcome Israel's political leadership? That this bizarre thing where the war was charging ahead, frozen place as American policy began to get much more shaky and indecipherable, and they were running on adrenaline. The adrenaline stopped, and the country itself is in a terrible emotional fix because it doesn't know which way to turn. Win in Rafah, get the hostages. Can you do both? Is there a way to do both? Is being militarily more strong a way to secure the hostage release, or is Hamas going to kill the remaining hostages as revenge or whatever? I just sense in Bibi's behavior over the last 3 or 4 days, as a longtime Bibi watcher, and Seth has been writing about Bibi for 20 years also, that he is running out of gas. Like this, the behavior toward what's going on here is either stuff is going on with America that we don't quite understand, and that he found it necessary to say that there was a tragic mishap here because America said, we need you to take some responsibility for this. And if you do, we're going to go easy on you. We're not going to, So by the way, horrible war crime, killing 7, food delivery workers from Jose Andres's restaurants. But the tent city, that's okay. Like this is the difference in the last couple of months. Like they basically go totally ape over that, and then this they're very quiet on. Like they said it shouldn't happen. Israel needs to be more careful. Is Bibi? Do you think he's running out of steam, or do you think that just the management of the relationship with this unbelievably inconstant administration, and we cannot figure out how they're going to react to anything at any given moment, is just like it's too much for anybody?
Yeah, I mean, look, a couple of points. One is Bibi is exhausted. I mean, there's no question about it. This is an exhausting job under the best of circumstances, being the prime minister of Israel. And when you look at what he's endured over the last 8 months, and it was exhausting, by the way, in the 10 months leading up to 10/7, that he was dealing with chaos on the streets, I think largely of his own making. And now he's dealing with elements of that chaos that continue on the streets because the protesters are still after him, and there are still people that are trying to bring down his government. And he's dealing with the demands of the military campaign in Gaza, the demands of what's happening in the north of the country, as well as the threats that are coming in from all around. Not to mention the lawfare campaign that's being waged, the media campaign that's being waged, the campus campaign here in the United States that's being waged. The Israelis are fighting on, I think I counted the other day, 11 different fronts. He's tired, and he should be tired. But I have to say that a lot of this does track back to the Biden administration's policy or lack of policy. You got to remember that the Israelis actually had a good head of steam heading into a Rafah operation, and then they were halted in March. And that was initially because of Ramadan, right? That they were, the administration and the rest of the world was warning the Israelis that if they finished this battle during Ramadan, boy, it was going to just, spark some kind of Armageddon religious war that the Israelis would not be able to contain. So the Israelis said, fine, we'll wait a month. Well, then that month ends, and then we start hearing from the administration, you've got 1.4 million people sitting in tents in Gaza. You cannot wage this war, so you need to wait, you need to clear them out, and we need a plan, and you need to articulate that plan to us, and we need to approve it. And so that pushes things off for maybe another, month or so. Now we're at this place with the ICJ where, everyone's talking about all eyes on Rafah. So the Israelis feel like they can't do anything with freedom of action. because every single thing that they do could be construed as a war crime. And so you get a sense that the more that Bibi has struggled against the system, right, as it continues to constrict him, he's just getting more and more exhausted. And this is, I think, the scenario that we've reached. And it does look, people are raising the questions about whether Bibi's the right guy for this, that maybe we need to see a change in leadership because he's already now, there's an arrest warrant that's going to be issued against him by the ICC. And on top of that, he's lost a chunk of the, Israeli population. But I got to say, what people miss here is that the policies that he's pursuing in the war, they're no different than anyone from the center of Israel would embrace. And probably even, we've got a new leader of the Labor Party. I'm not sure that Yair Golan would think differently about the aims of this war. The Israelis are still incredibly unified about what needs to be done, namely that Hamas needs to be destroyed, that Israel needs to get control of Gaza again. And then after that, they're likely going to have to go north to take care of Hezbollah. These things don't change when you talk to anyone that represents kind of the center of gravity in Israel right now.
But
so we're go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just thinking. I mean, aren't Bibi's failings then, such as they may be, just a matter of his not finally tuning out America on this, tuning out Washington on this? I get, for very good practical reasons, why he couldn't do that from the get-go, but at this point, it's becoming a pretty big liability in their war effort. At some point, you have to stop saying we're prepared to go alone and go, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I agree with you, and I think that is potentially where Israel is going to end up anyway. But doing what Israel likely needs to do in Gaza and perhaps beyond without a safety net, diplomatically speaking, is it's a scary thought, I think, for anyone in Israel, and certainly for the leadership, even those that are defiant, even those that wish to challenge the Biden administration and some of the insane things that they've been uttering about Israel and what they're doing in Rafah. But then there's another thing also, which I just need to point out, and that is munitions. Right? I mean, we are the source of the vast majority of the munitions that the Israelis are going to use. Now, as I understand it, they have enough to do what they need to do in Gaza and probably in Lebanon too. But, without knowing how to replenish at the end of these battles, that's a scary thing for the Israelis to grapple with. And, they've hitched their wagon to us, and now they're watching the Biden administration, they're not even getting stabbed in the back. In some cases, they're getting stabbed in the chest, and they're watching it happen in real time. This is actually, when you want to talk about the deflation that we see in Israel right now, it's, up until very recently, it was, look, Biden, has to say certain things to his electorate, and he's speaking to his base, but we're still okay. I would say that since the ICJ thing last week, you're beginning to get a sense among Israelis that, okay, well, it actually looks like everyone's against us, and potentially also the United States, depending on what we do. And that is, I think, the deflating thing for the Israelis.
You have to remember one other thing, which is that America is able to do things if it really wants to express displeasure that are not necessarily all that public. If we flash back to 1991, when the Iraqis were firing Scuds at Israel, and Israel was put in a position where the Israeli policy was, you hit us, we hit you back. That was how they dealt with Arab countries, since 1948. And America said, don't do it. We're in the middle of a war. It's better for you if we win in Kuwait and, we do what we have to do. We'll see if we have your back. We're going to give you some defensive systems. We gave them the Arrow system to shoot down Scuds if that was going to work. But it wasn't just that, because quietly, and we didn't really know that then it started to leak out, was that in order if they were to fly planes to do something, they would need telemetry to help them avoid or send messages to American aircraft that they were not hostile Iraqi aircraft. And it was the decision of the first Bush administration, to deny them those codes, to send the all clear message that they were not hostile and that they should not be fired upon, thus making it impossible for Israel to strike back at Iraq if it felt that it had to, because the skies were full of Allied aircraft. I don't know what the analogy is today. I know the positive analogy is what happened, as Jonathan alluded to, on the night that Iran fired its salvos at Israel, which was a kind of net of help from America and the Europeans in terms of information sharing and this and that and blah, blah, blah. That was exactly the polar opposite of this, which is, okay, we're going to use all our resources together to defend you against this missile barrage. But if Israel goes it alone, like actually openly goes it alone in a way that is totally defiant of the Biden administration, there are things that they can do that we don't understand that can hamper the Israeli military effort, not morally, not because they would turn on us at the UN or say bad things to us at the court, but actually on the battlefield. And the first touch of that was this supposed withholding of some of the munitions deliveries 3 weeks ago or whenever that was. So it's not so easy to go unilateral.
Not. Yeah, and by the way, I mean, as I understand it, there's only one delivery so far that's been delayed, but it's not been scuttled. So, I mean, I think some of these reports have been really exaggerated, not surprising in today's media environment. But let me actually just touch on that 1991 episode. The reason why, and it's funny, I remember studying that in graduate school with my professor, Ken Stein, who is still a friend of mine, and we still talk. And I remember at the time, I was saying this does not seem like the Israel that we know, that Israel agreed to stand down in the face of aggression. It wasn't standing up for itself and what gives. And really, at the end of the day, it was an acknowledgement that the U.S., with an international coalition, was going to dispatch with Israel's enemy, and that Israel, all it needed to do was just sit back and open up a bag of popcorn and kind of enjoy the show. Yes, you had, the potential for Saddam to send, chemical weapons via Scuds, but there were, at least some guarantees that the U.S. was going to be defending Israel as long as Israel stayed out of the way. But that was an offensive attack against Israel's enemies that they knew was imminent. What we're looking at here is just simply defense. And defense is not enough right now, right? The Iranians are not deterred, nor are Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, right? This is a major problem for Israel, that they can't just say, fine, we trust you, because there is nothing imminent here. We continue to see that the administration looks to want to appease the Iranian regime. They're trying to contain the war for another 6 months until elections pass before Israel may have freedom of action. There are no guarantees here that Israel comes out of this hole with the current strategy or lack thereof articulated by this administration. And that's the pickle that the Israelis find themselves in right now. It's either take action themselves, where we don't even know what that action might look like, or trust the United States, but potentially find yourself in a worse strategic position over time.
Tactically, though, and maybe we should sort of close out here, but tactically, not only do they have control of 75% of the Philadelphia corridor, but just to go to Seth's, let's talk a little positively. They have Hamas cornered in Rafah. This was the aim. They've driven them down the south. Their back is against the wall. They got one back to the Israeli border. They got one back to the Egyptian border. Most of the people have been moved out. They are there. There's nowhere for Hamas to run. Maybe it'll take 3 months. Maybe it'll take 4 months. We don't know what it even means for them to do what it is that they're going to do. But with the exception of this terrible, slow delay, they are where they were going to be. They drove them south. They backed them against the wall. and Hamas is backed up against the wall, and now their goal, I guess, is with these 4 remaining battalions to pick them off or to kill them one by one or to do whatever it is that they're going to do. And that, people, we should, as we talk so pessimistically, remember that in fact the Israeli war plan, which people are saying, oh, there's no war plan and it's terrible and all this, has actually reached this point. And you have armchair generals saying things like they should have gone to Rafah first, which is, by the way, kind of insane, because I don't think they were in Rafah, that they weren't centered in Rafah on October 8th when they had to go to war, when they started the war, really, which was like October 27th. But nonetheless, okay, so that it should be kept in mind that Israel is now where it needs to be to finish the war and claim victory. What's comic or darkly comic about what Biden has done to himself is that he has delayed Israeli action so that the worst and bloodiest aspects of this war could be happening, during his convention, when there are going to be 10,000 protesters or 100,000 protesters in Grant Park in Chicago. Congratulations, Joe Biden. If you let the Israelis try to finish by spring, you would have had a clear shot through the summer and autumn, also to claim some role in the victory, which would be pleasing to a lot of Americans who aren't part of the SJP, let Hamas win coalition. So, I mean, I think that's worth remembering. We were talking months ago, I think, on this podcast, and I talked with Dan Cedar on his podcast, and all that, like, look, the problem for Biden is going to be Israel's going to finish is going to finish the war with Hamas like in June, let's say, which obviously is not going to happen. But then they're going to have to turn north. Biden's obviously not going to want them to be fighting in the north with Hezbollah in the last weeks of the campaign. It's not going to look good, like it's not stable. So that could be a real problem. So that's not happening because they're not ready to turn north. They have to finish in Rafah. Meanwhile, Hezbollah is like barraging the north like crazy. And he's just gotten the worst of all worlds here politically, as far as I can see. Not strengthening his position, he's weakened his position among Democrats. He's not winning Dearborn, Michigan. And he's, so I don't know.
And geostrategically, as Jonathan points out, I mean, losing leverage with the Saudis. Looking weak and waffling on the world stage, yeah.
Right.
And there's the other part of whether the delay is allowing Hamas to regroup to some extent in other areas, right? There's someone stealing the aid, someone shooting at Israeli soldiers at the near the corridor, and stuff like that. So, I mean, is that like, how much should people worry about Hamas gaining strength just from this dragging out? And because if Biden wants this over, right, and it might not also, even when it's over technically in Gaza, it might not be over in Gaza, I guess.
I don't know. I just want to say that according to the Israeli government, 14,000 Hamas fighters have been killed. Hamas is not, a bunch of people, you give them drugs and then you strap explosives to them, and then they go to the Ben Yehuda Mall and they blow themselves up. Like, this is a trained paramilitary force, and you lose one and you can't just replace them with, this is not the Russian army. Like, it's not just you replace them with cannon fodder. These are trained this is an army, and when you kill off the army, they don't just regrow a head. And so if that's true and they've killed off half of Hamas's fighters and half remain in some fashion, like, that's already a significant degradation of Hamas's warfighting capabilities. And now they got them cornered, and they should be able basically to pluck them off or bunker buster bomb them into being not alive anymore. And then the idea may never die. It could be, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. You strike me down, I will be more powerful than ever before. Not in this circumstance.
That which is dead can never die.
Yeah. No, but you strike them down and they're down, and then they can't come at you. So the reconstitution of Hamas requires living people in Hamas, and the Israeli military aim is to kill everybody in Hamas. Like, there's no peace with Hamas. There's no peace with a Hamas fighter. So I don't know. That's maybe that sounds grim. I mean, Jonathan, does that comport with your understanding?
It does. And I have to say, just to bring it back, I mean, what we're watching right now with the declarations from Norway and Ireland and Spain to recognize a Palestinian state, the efforts by the ICJ and the ICC to punish Israel for defending itself and to prevent the end of this campaign, and the Israelis are on the 5-yard line. Those are the toughest yards to get, as we all know in football. But they are there, and I think they've done the lion's share of the fighting that needs to be done. They've gotten control of the Philadelphia corridor, which means that they can potentially cut off weapons and reinforcements. So they are exactly where they need to be. And then you've got this campaign actively right now trying to stop Israel from finishing this fight. And you're right, John, 14,000 people killed, then there's thousands that they've captured and thousands still that have been injured to the point that they're not going back on the battlefield. And yeah, they have apparently they've been recruiting among younger kids to come back and try to join the fight because of their disdain for Israel. But these people are going to be cannon fodder. And it's, once again, a sign of that kind of human shields and human rights violations that Iran and Hamas are known for. Hamas is losing steam. We just need to give Israel what it needs to finish this fight. And now you see, the international community, sometimes the Biden administration, sometimes the Europeans, all the time Hollywood, all these people are pushing right now to halt Israel from doing what it needs to do. The sooner we get through this, I think the better off Biden will be. And I don't think he quite realizes that. I don't think the world quite understands that Israel doesn't necessarily need to widen this war if they get what they need here. I think the Israelis are looking for a way to end this gracefully. And right now, they're not being even afforded that option. And that is, I think, really where you're going to see the Israelis chafing and pushing and testing limits, even in defiance of the U.S., because they know that they have to come out of this looking strong. In some shape or form, they need to look like they've ended this on their terms.
Okay, I think we're gonna we've gone long, so we will forbear from the commentary recommends today, but we will have one tomorrow. And Jonathan Schanzer, thank you so much as ever for your wise words and your sanity and sang-froid. And for Abe and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.